Hi folks, I'm back and this is Cutting Through the Matrix. I like to start off sometimes by giving out a quote by one of the big players who attended a lot of these global meetings, attended the think tanks and workshops to do with how they would implement them and how things would happen without the public even really knowing or ever understanding what had really happened. The media would take care of all the managing of our thought processes. And one of them, of course, was Aldous Huxley. And he said a long time ago, he said, at a speech he gave in Berkeley to, again, up-and-coming technocrats who'd be involved in managing you today. But in 1962 he gave a speech at Berkeley and it says here, it seems to me that the nature of the ultimate revolution with which we are now faced is precisely this. He's talking to a peer group here, really, you see. That we are in the process of developing a whole series of techniques. Techniques are very interesting. You've got to understand it's a simple word just to say it, but it means so much in scientific terms. A series of techniques which will enable the controlling oligarchy who have always existed and presumably will always exist to get people to love their servitude. And he wasn't kidding. It wasn't some wild guess. They knew exactly what they could do with most of the human populations of the planet. And that's what we're seeing happening today. I've lived through a good part of this too. I've watched the con games of, say, the European Union from its not from its inception. It's actually they started setting up the offices in every European country to work towards integration in 1948. They staffed them and kept it secret from the public. And eventually when they told the public what they were doing, they lied again, and they said it was just to do with making it easier for trade between the nations of Europe, a sort of bargaining table. And yet every year prime ministers would go over, regardless of their party, and sign what they called closer ties, which was never explained to the public. It was like George Bush Sr.'s term, New World Order. It was never explained to the public either. It's one of these terms that meant a lot to those higher up there. And closer ties meant they were binding you together with your economic laws and banking laws, because the banks were running it basically, and every other kind of law to boot. Until you end up with a parliament, which they said was never the intention, of course. And now the Parliament is running roughshod over all the populations as they bankrupt them one after another. And the latest country they've gone after, of course, is Ireland. I knew they'd hammered Ireland because Ireland stood up against every ratification treaty and said no. And then they got walked over regardless. But they gave them a little bit of an annoyance, and that's what you get when you annoy the big boys at the top. People don't realize that in the early 70s, in 71, that the Rothschilds group formed a bank from the City of London, of course. They formed a 6 major bank cartel with the banks of Europe. Supposedly, again, to help ease the integration of the economies and so on, long before they told the public they were doing anything of the kind, bringing them all under one system and one parliamentary system. The bankers were way ahead, naturally, because a lot of the bankers funded the thing. They funded the Huxleys, they funded all the big players who helped them work this plan into action.